Welcome to our next coaching video. In this video, we're going to be covering the topic of overall protocol. And I was so excited when this one came up as the winner because it's kind of important. We need to know what the overall trends are as we're going through our vocabulary lesson. As you're going through this with me, please know that this is straight from Anita Archer. I was actually trained by Anita Archer herself in this vocabulary protocol. So we know that everything that is in this lesson or this overall idea of the vocabulary instruction is legit. And not only is it legit, it works. So as we're going through it, if you have any questions or you want me to come in and model this so you can see it or like co-teach with you, I would jump at the chance to do that with you. So just let me know. Let's go ahead and get started. Overall procedure. So for your Anita Archer protocol, there are 4 main sections. Of course, we're going to add to these sections as we go, and I'll show you some best practices to put into your lesson. But 4 main practices are going to make up the meat of the lesson. So the first practice is going to be your introduction. This is where you say the word and you have the students pronounce the word correctly with you. Pronunciation is very important because they need to know how to say the word, especially if it's a difficult word to say. During this portion, you're also going to be breaking up the word into syllables if applicable. The second one is explain. So this is where you're going to be getting into the definition of the word. Of course, vocabulary is not all about word and definition, but it is a big part of it. Make sure when you are using your definition, they are student-friendly. We don't want to use definitions that have difficult words in them that they don't know yet. Number 3 is examples, and we've kind of already touched on this last week with our examples and non-examples, but of course these are your concrete, your visual, and your verbal examples. So you can be using the sentences, you can be using your example and non-example slide, or you can be bringing stuff in so students can actually physically touch the example. And the fourth one, of course, is your checking for understanding, making sure the students are actually engaged in the lesson and are understanding what the word means and how to use it. So we're going to look at examples and non-examples and generate examples through turn and talks or share out. Of course, there are other good instructional practices that we want to incorporate into our vocabulary protocol. The first one being motion. This one is a huge one, and just because you teach the older kids doesn't mean they don't get to do motions. I know sometimes they grumble and groan, but deep down inside they like the motions. Especially when you have recall and you're trying to have that student bring that information back, having some sort of motion that they can do quick to match with the word helps them recall the definition. So add an emotion with every word that you do. I would recommend if you are on a grade level team that you all do the same motion. So just talk about it real quick before you do it. Second, your read aloud. Referencing the read aloud book that you're getting your vocabulary from. For open court, it's going to be for kindergarten first, your big books, and for second and third grade, it's going to be your student anthologies. Also in first grade, you're going to switch from big books to anthologies, so you'll kind of be in both. In the presentation, I have put the page that the vocabulary word is on onto the presentation, so you don't have to worry about digging it out. But you do want to make sure that you read the story before you introduce the vocabulary. Then we'll jump over here to word relatives. This is examining different forms of the word. This is where you have your base word, your prefixes, your suffixes, and you're talking about how that word can be seen in different forms. I love this part because not only do they now know one word, but they know all of the word relatives as well. Now, it might be a little bit different for the definitions, but at least they have been exposed to all the different types of words that word can make. And then down here, teacher speech, immediately adding whatever word you're talking about into your own language. So using it after you introduce it, of course, using it in regular conversation with your students, or even during your lesson, then using that word into your sentences that you're giving out. Okay, so now we come to the part where I'm going to kind of go through the whole protocol, and I'm using the slides version. If you're not using the slides version, you can still apply this with the card, but just kind of make a mental note of how I progress through it. Okay, so I think this is second grade. So I'd say Boys and girls, today's word is panic, and I've had them say, what's the word, everyone? Panic. Now, I probably won't do it how I would actually teach it because you're going to get kind of weirded out by that because you're an adult. But I'm going to go through and kind of show you what I would do. So from there, we would say the word a couple of times, repeating it, making sure we are saying it correctly. And then we would do our movement for the word panic. So we would go panic. I could do a whale, panic. We could do dropping jaw, panic. We could do jumping, panic. Lots of different things to show that there are two different syllables. I could also do on my smartboard, doing the little scoops of our under pan and ick. Here's another great opportunity if you're talking about phonics. You could talk about how this word ends with IC because it is a multi-syllable word instead of ICK. All right, moving on. Then this is where we're going to have the definition come into play. So I have uncontrolled fear. I'm assuming that my second graders know the word uncontrolled. If they don't, I'm going to give a quick definition about what uncontrolled means. I might show them with my body or give some examples. So I would say, what's the word? They would say panic, and I'd say the definition is, and we read it together, uncontrolled fear. I'm going to do that a couple of times just to practice. From here, this is when I'm going to put my motion into play. My motion is going to go along with my definition and my word. So I always want to give my definition first before introducing my motion. So uncontrolled fear, panic, I mean, those people have it right there. It's just gonna, so we would probably make that silly noise and go like this. So then every time they hear the word panic in my presentation, they're going to do, so it's just a recall for them. Then we talk about the synonyms. I might throw a different or some more synonyms in here. I might put some antonyms up there as well, but I want to have one main synonym for sure to connect it. So my synonym for panic is horror. All right, from there, and if you see up here in the corner, I'm kind of going through the steps here. So we've done, one was introduced, two was explained, which is the definition. Now we're into examples. So for this one, I would either do, it depends on my students' levels here, their reading levels. I would either have them echo me, I would have them read along with me, or I'd do something called closed reading, which is where I read and then I stop and they have to say the next word. So we would read this together. The whole crowd went into a panic when the alarm sounded, and I would encourage them to do that motion and say that word with me. Then we talk about how that crowd is going into a panic and maybe what's causing that panic, just giving a little bit of a background for that. Then we go into another example, and again, I would do echo reading, choral reading, or I'd do closed reading here. So this one we would read, sometimes I panic at the store because I can't see my mom anywhere. And from here, I'd probably have a conversation with them about, well, who has been to a store before where they have lost mom and they don't know what to do. So we'd probably have show of hands. I wouldn't really go into like specific kids telling me stories because that tends to, spiral into something else. But just a quick yes or no is fine. Then from there, that's when I would go into my read aloud. So here, this is straight from their anthology. I just put a purple box around the portion that you're going to read, and then the yellow box has the main question. So I like what Rhonda, shouting you out, I like what Rhonda did in her presentation. She actually had the question, and she read the question to them first so they knew what they were looking for. And then we went through and read the story. I'm not going to do that now just for sake of time, but that's what that slide does. Okay, then for number, up here we just changed to check. So number 4, we're going to check with examples and non-examples. And with these, you want to make sure your examples and non-examples are very close. So they really have to think about, does this word mean what the definition says? So we'd go through these, probably I would read them or we would choral read them, but we're doing it together as a class. It's not one person raising their hand and saying the answer. It's everybody working together. So from there, we go through them and we find the non-example. Now for these, I do like to give some background because they might not know some of the background. Maybe they've never been picked up by mom at school, so they don't know that feeling. So I'm going to give some background for these and make sure that they understand the situation. Then if you notice, I did go back to explain up here because the word families really go back into the explain more than examples or anything else. And it's okay to skip around. I mean, if you don't want to do it in this order, that's fine. Just make sure you're hitting the part. So I'm doing my word families here. This is where I would definitely pick up like my smartboard pen or my clever touch pen, and I would be underlining the base word and circling the suffixes. And we'd talk about how, panicked is the past tense, panicking is the present tense. And we would just go through all those. I would have them read them with, or not choral, I'm sorry, echo read them with me so they hear the pronunciation correctly and then repeat it correctly back to me. From there, I then read the story down below. Anytime they hear any form of the word panic, they're going to give me that motion, and then we kind of talk about the story after it's done. Then your final step is going to be your check with your turn and talk. And this provides such a great opportunity because it's allowing the students to talk with a peer, have those collaboration moments, but it also allows you to go in and interact with those students that, one, might be having some problems with understanding, or two, can't come up with a sentence on their own and need some support. So here I'm going to explain the picture. I'm going to say we all have times when we panic. Then this prompt is tell why you think this man is panicking. Now I use the word panicking in this because it makes more sense with the picture. I didn't use the word panic and that's okay. I'm using some form of the word. So all of my turn and talks have this sentence starter. And this is appropriate for any grade because it's allowing the student to use the word correctly. It's not letting them come up with some random sentence that doesn't use panic correctly. It is using it correctly and setting them up for success. So we would read this together. This man is panicking because, and then I would share my example first, and then I would tell them to turn and talk. And now we'll get into turn and talk later when we have a whole session on that, but make sure you're giving very clear expectations on that. As they're turning and talking, I'm going around and talking to different groups. Just make sure it doesn't go on too long because then they'll fill the silence with something. And then afterwards, you're going to pick very specifically 2 or 3 kids to share out. I recommend picking the kids that you talked to so you know that it is a good example of the word. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up real quick because I'm already at 12 minutes. Don't forget about this stuff to add in. Whenever possible, this is the biggest thing for vocabulary. Use the vocabulary in your everyday classroom whenever you can. In conversation with kids, in directions with kids, in looking at the wall and saying, oh, we haven't used that word in a while, let's use it in a sentence. This is going to be your biggest factor for vocabulary recall, for vocabulary instruction. What I did is I put my vocabulary words on a wall and I literally turned them over when my kids understood what it was. So that way I had a visual that, oh, we need to go back and use that in our everyday language a little bit more. Remember that you might be the only person that has rich vocabulary for these students. They might go home and not get that rich vocabulary. So it's our job to make sure that they are being exposed to this type of language. Make sure you're engaging your students with opportunities to respond. This should be 3 to 5 times a minute. I know that sounds like a lot, but these kids need it. Make sure that they're engaged with you. Here's a couple of examples. Echo back, read together, turn and talk, nonverbal signs, and writing. We'll go into more of those as well later on in a different session, but just make sure as you are setting this up for success that you are engaging your students. And then, of course, don't forget to write. This is one of the things that gets dropped very quickly from vocabulary instruction, but it's one of the most important. Anita Archer says it best. Students in every class should maintain a vocabulary log that includes, at a minimum, the vocabulary term and a definition. Students could also add on an original sentence, an illustration, synonyms, etc. Vocabulary logs can be used for self-study, class review, and partner study. So it's very, very important for recall that you're going back and you're having your students write the word and the definition at minimum, but I mean, it would be great to have sentences, illustrations, synonyms, so they're using those words and they're getting them into their noggin. It takes about 4 exposures to a word for them to have it in their brain. Okay, I'm hitting 15 minutes, so I gotta stop. But if you have questions about any of this overall protocol, if you want me to write it out for you, if you want me to come in your classroom and model it for you, or just be with you as you're teaching it, so you can say, hey, I have a question about this as you're teaching, please let me know. I will be so happy to come and work with you for vocabulary as we are going through Anita Archer's protocol. But of course, email, drop by, set up a meeting, whatever you need to do. But thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you later. Bye-bye.